Jeff, I am so psyched to
Thanks.
have you on the podcast. Thanks so much for taking the time. How are you?
My pleasure. I'm looking forward to it, and we've known each other for a long, long time, so it's great to spend more time with you.
Yeah, and I'm honored, as well. I've always enjoyed like our chats, together. So I'm sure this will not disappoint whatsoever.
I'll do
So,
my best.
okay, no pressure. So, I have a couple of things that I wanted to kind of chat with you about. And when we're started doing these podcasts, we're really wanted to talk to folks who are leaders in the community, either in front or behind, the community, and then to let people to get to know them. And so I'd like to start off with just really kind of talking about kind of your career journey and kind of how you kind of got to where you are, now. Like I met you at Cisco, and that was a
Yep,
while ago, So
as well.
you even go back before that would be super, And so if we can kind of go through a career journey, and then I have a couple things that I have kind of planned that I want to chat with you about. Okay.
Sure, sounds good.
Okay.
Should we start at the beginning?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's start.
Yeah,
Let's start
I
there.
mean, it's fun. So I think one thing about me, I'm just like a kind of intellectually curious person, and you'll probably kind of see it reflected in a bit of the journey. So it's fine. I actually started in consulting out of undergrad.
Uh,
I had two. My parents were both school teachers, and that we didn't know anything about business, but I was kind of interested in it. So did that for a few years. Then went back to grad school, and came out of grad school right during the .com craziness,
yeah.
and with a buddy founded a .com startup in 1999.
Whoop,
Basically, think
whoop.
of, yeah, eBay for used cars.
Yeah.
Raised, actually a reasonable amount of money. Ended up having like 80 people in the company, but never basically didn't get our customer acquisition cost to a reasonable point by the time we kind of figured out how to scale the service. And so it's funny, like wound that down, and it's funny. I was talking to one of the VCs coming out of that, and everybody's like, look, we never would have normally hired two folks in their mid-20s to go and do this.
Yeah.
But if you like, you should go get a real job and then come back and see us in a few years, a real technology job. And so
Yeah,
I
that's
ended
kind of
up,
different today, right? Isn't it? We're
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
different today.
It's
It's like,
actually better
oh,
to be in
okay,
your mid-20s. Yeah.
yeah. It's like, all right, great. All right, so all right, all right. Now you learned what not
Yeah,
to do. All right, so
exactly.
let's think about what's next. Yeah. Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt, but
No,
but go
no,
ahead.
no.
Yep.
And
Yep.
then it was great. So and then I ended up joining Veritas Software kind of before the
Ah.
Symantec acquisition,
Hmm.
and file systems, volume managers, clustering, ran product management and started to run some engineering there. So that was kind of where I got in a real kind of like, you know, legitimate technical product management and product leadership roles.
Yeah.
And it was
Insecurity.
really great. Yeah. And I think,
Yeah.
a huge kudos to the team. It's just a really set of amazing individuals that were hired in that span that we got to work together, and have gone off and started companies and are, major VCs in the Valley and so on and so forth. And then from there is when I transferred over. I had an opportunity to go and join Cisco in wiring and closet switching, and so went over there and
Wow.
spent
Wow.
roughly 10 years at Cisco. The first 6 or so in the networking side. That's where you and I first got to spend time together, and
Yeah.
then went over to be in the security world. And so that was great.
Yeah.
I was able to see like an operation at massive scale at Cisco, in terms of 16 led product management for the enterprise networking business, like $16 billion, ran a 2,000 person team in networking cloud security. And so I had a really good opportunity to kind of see things at scale.
Yeah. And also, it's like that was a pretty quick ascension, like 10 years, and then, you were running the security business. You had the job that Tom Gillis has, right now.
I was the one. So G Rittenhouse, who's now over at AWS in security, so
Yeah.
he was the Tom piece,
Yeah.
but I don't know, yeah, a large swath of what was under that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then engineering and product management. So it was a fun role. Yeah.
Yeah, like 2,000 people, $16 billion. Yeah, it's a great role.
Yeah.
Congrats. Yeah.
Lots of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
All right.
then
So,
Google came knocking. And look, I think for a lot of us that have kind of been in enterprise infrastructure for a long time, obviously, the cloud is a huge new frontier in that space, and just had a really interesting opportunity to go over to Google Cloud and you come in the VP and basically had responsibility for Kubernetes and the Kubernetes serverless, kind of that space,
hmm,
which it was really interesting because it's a little bit different in terms of the world that I'd been in versus that.
totally.
That's the thing, for me. I do enjoy like seeing new technology areas. I think it's good and bad in some ways, in the sense that there will be people that are deeper than me in an area because they've spent just a much longer period of time there. But yeah, the good news is I've seen file systems, volume managers, networking, security, Kubernetes, et cetera. So there's hopefully that adds some value to my to
I think so. It's like, well, one, you have really, you look about infrastructure. All right. So you have network, you have security, and you have compute. The
yeah.
only place maybe that, there might be, and frankly, I never really got excited by storage either, but like maybe the storage piece
That
is
was
the only
Veritas.
piece.
That was my beginning of Veritas, though. File systems and volume
Oh,
managers.
oh
Oh,
yes. I'm so
oh,
sorry.
A2. No, so
Oh, I'm so
yeah.
sorry. All right. So you had it all. You had all the major components
I
of
haven't gone
infrastructure.
back, just to be clear, but yeah. Uh,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
that's
So
awesome. Yeah. So like, but I thought that no, go ahead. I think you're probably still into the Google space, into the Google phase. But continue.
yeah. So then was there for a bit, and then it was really interesting what Google Cloud has been doing in the security space. You made a huge call to like Thomas Curran and Sunil Poti, who were Sunil was
Yep.
my
So
boss at Google when I came over to security, and Thomas is the cloud CEO, and they made a very like specific set of decisions around investing in security and building a business there. And so roughly right about the period when Google was, before we had announced, but we knew that we were likely going to acquire Mandiant, I was asked to come
yeah.
over and be the VP of product for cloud security.
Hmm.
And just a really, really interesting job because it mixed all the platform security work, encryption, key management, all the work we do around compliance and things like that, as well as the business that Google Cloud was building specific to security. So the security operations, so Chronicle, SIM and SOAR, all the Mandiant SaaS
Yeah.
products, what we're doing in terms
Hmm.
of cloud native application protection, et cetera. So it's a really so came in to lead the product team, so product management and UX across that span for a couple of years. So
Big
yeah, so that
space.
was amazing. Yeah.
So then, but I thought then you were also you had Atheos.
I had Anthos. Yeah, yeah,
Anthos
Anthos
as well.
in the early stages in the Kubernetes world. Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
So
okay. All right. So that fell underneath security, or was that
that
like
was actually under. So I kind of had two roles when I was at Google. One was in the Kubernetes serverless, that world, and Anthos was there. That's where I
yeah,
started, and then
yeah.
I moved over kind of halfway through my Google
Oh,
tenure to go lead the product team for security.
okay. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, well, that's so just that stretch of time between Cisco and also GCP is just that is really kind of like the whole major trend that the industry has kind of gone through as
Yeah.
well, and you kind of mirror that, right? So we,
Yeah,
it's
exactly. Yeah, as customers were onboarding the cloud, I too was onboarding the cloud. It's probably the way to think
yeah,
about it. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, it's like we had large on-prem going on, and you were there at Cisco, and then the shift off to off-prem, and and clearly over at GCP. Yeah,
yeah,
and so we worked with I don't know we had a program called the Cloud Security Notification Framework, or CSNF. So we got
yep,
to work with like UMesh over there.
yeah,
Sunil for a little bit, Tom. We got to just interact with him, not really work with him, kind of really interact with him. And then a couple of other folks, really like Google always, gets to really bring in really top talent, really smart people, and so
Yeah.
it was always impressive to kind of work with them and to really on almost like a day to day basis when we are doing kind of that open source project, and they were really great, really great to work with, as well.
No,
So
excellent.
then,
Yeah.
all right, so great. So out of those experiences, was there like anyone like it's that was kind of a mentor, especially in kind of the transition when you first went into like Cisco, that was influential, in kind
Yeah.
of guiding your career. Is there like anyone that you
Yeah.
thought, that oh yeah, so like thanks so much for like that guidance, and that kind of set me on this particular vector.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Rob Soderberry,
Oh
a
yeah.
bit as well. Yeah. So Rob was really, a huge kudos. I mean, he wasn't the only one, but very formative. I spent much of my career at Veritas working directly for him. He moved over to
Oh,
Cisco, and then he
oh,
recruited me 6 months or a year after that to come over. And he's always been just a tremendous champion of mine
oh,
throughout my career. So yeah, so it's
yeah,
good. One of
yeah,
the just incredibly sharp and analytically, really good analytically. But the interesting thing that I also learned from him was operating at scale in a way that
mm,
he really kind of had this thought around, how do we, how can we get even 10 or 15% more out of the organization if it's a couple thousand, or I think one time he had 5,000 people in his org. Like it's a huge force multiplier in terms of
yeah,
the overall capacity, and so kind of really kind of paying attention to, you know, how do we look at an engineering organization and allow that to be, how can we make it more efficient? How can we ensure that there's a degree of innovation, but also structure? So those are all things that I think he was just particularly good at, and
yeah.
really helped me.
Yeah, well, clearly that's cool, and that's key. It's like you're right, big force multiplier there, and step function if you can get it done right. It's like what are some of the stats? Like anywhere, it's only about 10 to 15% of kind of the engineering organization that delivers almost 90% of the kind of leadership and the innovation. So you have, and that's not a knock on everybody else, but you have this group, this small group that really is kind of driving a lot of the innovation. They're plugged
Yeah,
into the marketplace in ways that maybe other people aren't plugged into. There's a lot of work, and so you need a lot of other people to kind of do that, work. And so trying to get everybody aligned is a big deal. And when you do it right, you really create some amazing things. And
yeah,
Cisco being in the security business is like one of them. It's like when you came in there, probably it was like I think less than $1 billion, maybe a couple $100 million at that,
basically
and so
firewalls, and
yeah,
and I'd say before, I was able to extend the work that Chris Young and Dave Geckler and others kind of before me had started, in terms of a little bit similar to like where Google, where Cisco decided, hey, there's real opportunity in security, and what
yeah,
are the steps that we can take in order to kind of help drive that, and you come up with a strategy with a good long-term vision. And then, what are the assets along the line? The Open DNS, the Duo Securities. I mean, they just did obviously the very large Splunk acquisition. But those are all, I think, a lot of that work was begun, I'd say, really like Chris Young's tenure around, hey, what are the,
mm,
how do we want to think about this as a business differently than we've been prosecuting it to date, and get out of just network security?
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because like security was almost like network management in like in the early 1990s, like when no one really wanted to do it, and there wasn't a lot of money in there. And in the beginning, security was kind of like that, especially on the consumer side. It's like, oh my god, it's tax that we have to pay, to kind of keep
Yeah,
ourselves
yeah,
secure. But there was all of a sudden there was kind of kind of like somebody kind of flew through the switch, and then the consumers realized, like, no, we got to really invest in this. It's kind of brand reputation, brand
yeah,
protection. litigation, compliance, like all that stuff. And it probably had to happen. Man, when did the CIO get defined? Was that 2004, 2005 timeframe? And I think that's probably when all of a
Yeah,
sudden the security marketplace, just kind of exploded. Like, budgets were just expanded to accommodate, and I'm sure like there was, a bunch of high profile exploits that, embarrassed a whole bunch of companies, that helped feed that, that frenzy, but I think, it's like, it's interesting. Even like within Google, it's like, I'd love to get your opinion on this. Is that there is even, and even when we were working with some of the folks, there was some thinking in there is that, yeah, we really are just trying to sell cloud services, not security services. It's kind of like once removed from the core of the business, but we have to do it. Because if we don't do it, no one's going to buy our cloud services. So was that thinking there, or was it, or that whole model flip and just say, no, this is a part of the overall offering?
yeah, it's 100%. I mean, I think, look, again, when I had joined that role, there's always the decision had already been made around trying to make a business out of it. But frankly, the single largest, don't pass go, don't collect $200, was how do we make sure that we're unblocking customers' ability to move workloads to the cloud?
Yeah.
And doing
Mm-hmm.
so, a lot of that was, do we have, does Google have the appropriate security controls to satisfy the requirements of these large multinational companies to move workloads? And I remember we hosted sit downs with banks and all their many layers of approvers and kind of walk through like, and really sometimes actually just a direct mapping of I'm doing this on prem, what's my equivalent in cloud. And so at least that was part of it. And other, like the more digital natives had generally had a different approach to how they thought about it. But yeah, that's a core,
Yeah.
for that team. That remains a core focus of them, is how do we make sure that customers can onboard effectively. And then on
Yeah.
top of that, to your point, as security spend increases and it becomes a really interesting market opportunity, where are the places where there's actually basically building a SaaS business around that Google
Right.
has been investing in. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So now you've come full circle. All right. So you've built,
Back to the small company world. Yeah.
yeah, back to small company world. So,
Yeah.
Vectra, right? Is that
Vectra.
correct? Yeah.
Correct.
So why don't we talk a little bit about Vectra? So what does Vectra do? And then what are you doing at Vectra?
Yeah. So Vectra is a multi-surface detection and response company. So that, if you think about Vectra, the the area that we're really focused on is how do we build excellent signal around attacker behavior, prioritize that well, and then allow
Mhm.
customers to take action on that with
Mhm.
a high degree of just like the world class in terms of fidelity around these are the things you should be paying attention to, and this is all the other noise in the environment. And so that's the core of what the company does, and the way that we do that is leveraging AI. And it's interesting. So Hitesh that is the founder, and Hitesh talks about when he was out raising money in 2012 around Sandhill,
Mhm.
this idea around, hey, we can utilize AI to find signal in network data. And so that was the original premise. And it's funny, he talked about like basically everyone said no to him. And then, you know, he was able to convince Vinod Khosla of Khosla Ventures, hey, this is a really good idea. And so that's really what started the whole thing. But now it seems like, of course, you would use AI techniques to do this.
Uh,
10 years ago, it was no, that won't do anything, et cetera. So that's
that,
like the
that
unique.
totally flipped.
Yeah, is that funny?
That totally flipped. Yeah.
And I think, but the thing that I loved and what drew me to Vector was the idea that they were able to marry domain expertise and knowledge from security researchers and stuff to identify what are the durable behaviors of attackers. If you think about when an attacker lands, they can change their cobalt Cobalt Strike, Sliver. They can use different tools and techniques kind of throughout the process, but the steps they take are generally pretty similar. I land in the environment, I establish a presence in a communication channel. I'll do some recon within what else is around the environment. I'll try to move laterally to be able to get onto a different machine, escalate my privilege, etc. And so like there's a standard set of behaviors, and it's interesting. We had a customer conference a couple months ago, and one of our security researchers went through an attack in like 2010, I think, and one in 2024, and two of the
Oh,
high
oh.
profile ones. They're like, though the exact things that they used were different, the steps were almost completely identical.
Mm-hmm.
And so what Vectra's done like better than any other technology out there is be able to identify those durable behaviors in the data that we collect by leveraging AI machine learning to find those. And so I think that's a really interesting thing. And so this idea of like how can we take this data, and it started on the network side, and hey, what's the network that we can glean, the data we can glean from network traffic to understand, is it a CTC or are they doing a port scan, those types of things. And we've extended that into identity signals, cloud signals, Microsoft 365, and Copilot's right around the corner. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the core of the solution.
So on that one, great. Thanks for that. So what's the data that you're kind of looking at? Is it, so you mentioned kind of networking data,
Yeah,
is it also um, like cloud provider? There's a lot of kind of notification and
100%.
log data that
Yep,
comes in from the cloud providers, as
exactly,
well. So is it
exactly. Yeah.
mostly like logs and telemetry, data from both
So
on-prem and
in the
off-prem?
network side, we actually take traffic and we'll strip out basically metadata that runs between a 0.5% and 1% of the traffic volume,
Hmm.
and use that as the core source for or the network-based detections. And those work both in on-prem networks and cloud-based networks. In
Yeah.
the SaaS identity, and we'll the other nice thing about the network side is network and identity are so closely linked. So Kerberos, all that we can glean a lot of stuff, from network on the identity side as well, and then we augment that with logs from Intra ID and other sources of identity logs and such. And then on top of that, to your point, Nick, there's all the different telemetries from the cloud environments themselves, and so a lot of what we work on is, I think one of the differences between we see a lot of other approaches, which is kind of bring all the data together into a SIM, try to make reason of that
Yeah.
accordingly, and write some rules, et cetera, and go. Is ours is a little more first principle based around like, hey, this is the things we are looking for.
Mm.
What data do we need in order to identify those? And that's where, like, between the AI team and the security research team, it's really like that kind of back and forth of security team kind of knows what behavior, and a bit of like, hey, this is the types of data where we think you would find that data you need. And the AI team then takes that and kind of says like, oh yeah, this is working or it's not working. We need to look for a different type of data set to find this behavior. So that's the kind of the marriage I think is really unique. And so that's the process. So it's much more, we're looking for these things. What's the data we need? Let's go get that data and write the appropriate algorithms. Is kind of
Yeah.
the process that we follow.
Awesome. Is there like a lot of that data is already coming in? Obviously, depending on the size of the company, a lot of them have kind of built their own rocket ships around kind of their own security data lakes. They have SIMs, they
Yeah.
have stores, and so forth. So, do you sit on top of that infrastructure? And for those who don't have it, do you help create that
Yeah.
infrastructure?
So
So,
great questions. I'd say
um,
we sit more alongside of the infrastructure of the SIM and store and are a feed into. So actually,
um,
almost all customers will take the network data that we create. There's no real equivalency of that would come from normal logs, et cetera. So that's like unique and specific, and is also valuable in a SIM and SOAR environment. Um, there's some overlap in terms of some of the like cloud logs and things like that, but even that, it's interesting. for example, if you look at Azure, the way that you enable logs is service by service. It's really hard to make sure that you're covered in terms of your Azure estate from
Yeah.
a security perspective. And so a lot of what we're doing there is like, how do we help kind of identify and make sure that you're collecting the right data, and then normalizing that, the same object can be called different things in different logs. So there's a lot of that work that goes into that, which then we can stream into a SIM environment. And then probably the most important thing is we come back with a kind of a perspective. The issue with all this is, look, there's a ton of signal in the security world, as you know.
Ton. Oh my God. Yeah. It's like, petabits, it's like, I think, the last time I checked, I can't mention the company's name, but kind of a large healthcare company. It's like, like 2 petabytes of data a day. It's just like
Yeah.
massive, just like, you know, but anyway, yes, I agree.
Yeah.
A lot of
So the
data.
problem is out of all that, what do you actually care about? And
Right.
and
Yeah.
and if you look at most of the historic high profile breaches, there was an alert somewhere that went off that said something wasn't awesome. It's just that
Mm.
alert was buried with another 10,000 alerts, and there was no real understanding of, hey, this one actually though matters and these other don't. And so
Yeah.
the 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 magic that we take on top of the AI is then we look at it from a host or account perspective, an entity
Uh,
perspective, and we
yeah.
look for multiple signs of behaviors that allow us to then prioritize. Hey, we think there's a real issue on this host or with this account, and that's where you need. So when you come in the morning, here's a list of things you should go look at.
Oh,
So that's,
okay.
I think, one of the unique things where we really focus on. And I was looking at data from one of our large healthcare customers. Over the last 3 months, we've essentially highlighted, you know, roughly 5 a day that you need to
Oh,
care about. So
that's,
much smaller
yeah,
number
that's a
than you
big
would.
signal.
Exactly. So that's a huge area of focus. Another financial customer, it's relatively new to us. Was looking at their data, and it was like a 1 a day. So again, so that's where, and obviously you can go below that if you want to go hunt other things that are less likely to prove successful. But our key is that, and in most cases you'll see, like if you look at an action, where we've detected actual attacker behavior or red team behavior, et cetera, you'll see multiple behaviors, C2, lateral, your recon
Oh,
behaviors, et cetera. And that's like how we know. And we look at both, do we see those? How quickly are they going, to help us kind of determine how much we want to prioritize things. So that's kind of the magic in the system, if that makes
yeah.
sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And I think, I'm sure you're probably working on the automated mitigation part of that as
Yeah.
well,
Yeah,
so it's
yeah.
like,
So
all
the
right,
good news,
here.
we tie in already and have a chunk of that. So don't want to block a host, disable an account,
Yeah.
like all that can happen right from the system, or can tie into your SOAR tool of choice. So either all
Yeah.
that work. Yeah.
Yeah, we had actually. I should put into the notes, for this is that Alex Schulman, who had Citigroup, she had all the engineering for security at Citi. She's now at Ernst and Young. She ran a really great panel at the last. We now call it the AI Networking Summit.
Mm.
Jeff. So, and in that session, she had Merck there, she had Google there, she had Merck, Google, Citigroup was there, and one other company. But it was all about kind of getting ready for identifying threats,
Yep.
and then having kind of AI either script or to be able to reconfigure to
Yeah.
mitigate that. And so how fast, what's the trust arc, in order for people to feel comfortable with that. And I think you kind of just outlined it, right? So first it's like, hey, identify these, and then, okay, right now it's like, okay, go off and do that, whatever those 5 recommendations, were. The next one could be, is like, all right, here are the 5 things, and you probably do this one already. Is that this is what you should do to mitigate
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Cool. And
then the
also
next
help.
one.
How do we like bring all the data your tier 2 or tier 3 analysts would want to have, at their
Um,
fingertips to do these things? So exactly. Yeah. So kind of, how
yeah.
do you kind of like supercharge the analysts is like a clear next step. And then, but it's interesting. Yeah, you're kind of thinking the same way I have. I think like the response world will, I think, change very dramatically with LMs.
Yeah,
It's a very natural application of that technology,
mm,
that
for
will.
sure. It's like a human, kind of human speech, and then also like it can write code. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah, 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 pretty
like
well.
shit. Yeah, very well. Yeah, and I think all of this too is like, and you hit it. It's like there is such a massive shortage, of security engineers.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
the unlike the last the numbers that we saw were like 750,000 kind of worldwide open recs. It's like crazy,
Yeah.
and almost the
I've seen
same
numbers, yeah,
number.
like roughly a million, basically unfilled, or like we have capacity to hire a million more than are actually available. Yeah,
That's crazy, and that gap will never get closed. We know. So the only way it's going to get closed is with like Vectra and and other solutions like that. That
100%.
really empower and take a lot of the toil out of security kind of operations and network operations, the whole infrastructure piece of this as well.
Yeah,
So
agreed.
okay,
And I
so
think
the
it's interesting how this kind of ties into network. A lot of the changes you might want to do would be on the networking side and from a response perspective. And so it is interesting how it does cross domains.
yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned identity a couple of times. Like,
Yeah.
what are you all doing in identity? Because like we're starting to think about identity, broader. So identify, things, whether
Yeah.
like if you're in an OT world and
Human or
IT world,
machine. Yeah, 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 yeah. Service
yeah,
accounts in the cloud environment, et cetera.
yeah,
Well,
objects. It's like
yeah.
just like have a portfolio of or things that have their own identity, and then tie that into kind of a policy as code, like in the control panel for policy, so that you can have policies for each one of these different identities and roles associated with those particular identities. And you guys seem to be like you're kind of like either you're already there or you're kind of like right around this space. Maybe
Yeah.
the implementation of that could be or maybe the best example of the implementation could be like zero trust. We've been
Agreed.
dancing around
Yeah,
zero
could
trust.
this help make zero trust more of a reality than we've kind of been able to do so to date? Yeah, we're
Yeah.
less focused on the policy side. We're focused on uh, Nick's account is doing things that we don't think it should be doing, and you want to go take a look at this. And this is where I think it's really interesting. You look at like some of the groups like Scattered Spider.
Mhm.
Many of their most recent attacks have been wholly like it's all around. I'm going to compromise a credential. I'm going to take that credential, and I may never actually like drop any malware or any code into your environment. I'm just going to be able to follow the identity chain and be able to privilege and do things that I shouldn't be able to do, and then exfil data or you know you know maybe the very endpoint drop some ransomware code and kind of go from there. So I think that's
Mm.
what we're seeing is the increase in attacks that were never through an exploit or a vuln or something like that, or identity is the foundational element of the
Uh,
compromise, is
yeah.
really taking off. And there was a interesting like Mandiant report just came out last week, I think. Yeah, last week, and they did a really nice job of like all their IRs and kind of what percentage came from what, and I think I can't remember. Identity wasn't the single largest. I think it was second on the list, though, in terms of
Uh,
like initial compromise. So I just think that's a really interesting spot. And to your point, now we have things like service account. There's all these additional identities out there beyond what we kind of dealt with 10 years ago. And so how do we think about those in the cloud world, in the OT space, et cetera? So those are all like really really interesting things. And again, places
yeah.
where the behaviors are typically relatively consistent and there's a lot of data and you need to, and I think that's the thing. If you look back, we had the kind of the UBA phase of, whatever, like 2016 or whatever. And, it just turned out that users do weird stuff all the time. And so if you're really you're taking an anomaly based detection approach, it
Yeah.
is going to be highly, highly noisy. And so that's one of the
Mhm.
key things that, our approach is very much more behavioral versus anomaly.
Yeah.
And we think that that's led to a lot better fidelity of the alerts. So yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, great. So then, what's kind of the roadmap for Vectra? So it's like it's like obviously not to disclose anything
Yeah, yeah.
NDA,
I can't be too
but
bad. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
yeah,
mean, so the fun, part of the thing, one of the reasons I think they were interested in me and I'm here is there's been big investment in the cloud, and you both protection of the cloud and of things like M365, but also
hmm
just building out the capacity in the cloud to do smarter, faster, better AI and detections and that. So a lot of our work right now is around that space,
yeah,
and just really allowing us the part of the things that excite me and what we're driving to is like what's our ability to ingest new sources or new signals and then rapidly take that with the research and the AI team and come back with you know better signals, better prioritization and triage. So that's been a big focus of ours. And I think what if you look at Vectra 5 years ago was only an NDR company and has
yep,
expanded in identity and M365 and cloud. And so I think we can continue to like do that. We're never going to be an EDR play, but actually
mm,
using EDR information and even the EDR signal directly could help us be smarter about how we prioritize and triage. So those are the types of things that we're working on, just so that, again, for us, it's about coming up with the things that when you walk in the door, like what are the things that are most important to the analyst team and being
yeah,
really, really accurate at that.
yeah. That's cool. That's a good problem space and a big problem space to attack. You know, um, I want to shift gears a little bit.
Oh,
So no, it's okay. And it's like what's interesting, and you kind of went through this, as well as I did. Like in the late 1990s, when we had the internet, kind of come on in, there was this. It was really kind of almost like an efficiency engine, right? It would kind of
yeah,
seek out things
100%.
that were inefficient, and it would boom, okay, you got productivity gain, with it, and lots of different dimensions. And AI
Yeah,
is
across all
now moving
industries, types of activities. Yeah,
horizontal, vertical,
yeah, exactly.
and clearly the same thing is happening with AI. So some of the being kind of an analyst, and from most of my adult career, so you tend to think about, okay, well then, what is the limit? When AI to the limit, kind of goes like, what happens to the overall economy? And I don't know. I do have some thinking on there, but I don't know. Have you thought through? It's like, you know, um, if we think in 5 or 10 years, if this technology is successful, and I'm pretty bullish, on that it will be. How the overall, maybe just think about the U.S. economy, but the global economy will be a derivative, really what happens, here in the states. Have you thought about any of that?
I have a little. So actually, my wife and I were talking about a bit about this weekend. Well, because it was
Yeah.
with the same
Let's go.
parallel, like kind of what happened with the internet phase. Like what are the implications? I think one of the productivity numbers have been pretty. They have not improved for a couple decades,
Yep.
so I think I'm in kind of the same wavelength you are. Is to me, this feels like it could really have a meaningful uplift in that world, in the productivity, and that has actually, I mean, obviously there will be winners and losers, but generally speaking, a pretty positive outcome, like holistically for the environment. And so that's kind of where, I, I think the same thing. I'm actually for a set of, not for every task, but there for a set of tasks where I think this technology is will be quite successful
Mm.
at driving speed and efficiency improvements. And I was even coding is interesting. I was back over at Google. There's some very interesting, it's a very interesting and positive data around the quality and speed of code creation.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that's driving us now. And here at Vectra, now with my role here, we're bringing that capability in house as well. Just because I think there's just generally goodness there, and it's not like I would take that and that would just improve everything we do. It's not like we would change the investment in developers. Like I can just go build more things faster, and that is hugely valuable for us. So I
Yeah.
think that's what I'm looking forward to, kind of the application of this technology.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that, and I think we're kind of both aligned. What I'm kind of thinking too is that like when I kind of extrapolate out to the limit, is that all right? So there may be kind of still very large companies will obviously will exist, and they'll kind of deploy these technologies, and they'll get the economic benefits. So you would think that their capex, not their capex, I'm sorry, their market capitalization should
Yeah.
increase. So there should be like large company, or most companies in the economy, since GDP is a kind of a function of productivity, that we should see an increase in the valuation of lots of companies, but also the number of people that are needed should go down. But the number of kind of new opportunities, new companies should increase. So it's
Yeah.
like, are we kind of going into a world where you know um, clearly there will be those companies that embrace, and those maybe are slow to embrace. And if the technology is highly potent, then those who embrace really quick, and are able to kind of like harness it, may be rewarded with like expanded, market share over their
Outsized
competitors.
gains. Yeah.
Yeah, outsized gain. Thank you. But also we may not need as many people. But I don't think there's like this big kind of fall off in the number of people. We've seen this in our industry, many times where we have this really efficiency that happens. But you grow faster than maybe the efficiency shrinks, or the efficiency's productivity. So like there's a bigger addressable market. But that, to me, it's like I'm kind of looking for kind of signs like that. It's kind of early right now to kind of
Totally.
to
Yeah.
to do a correlation there. But I think if this goes the way that I think a lot of folks are thinking of, yeah, big companies, fewer people, more companies. It's like it's kind of like is what I'm thinking about. In here. So um, I'm not sure how to put that into a trade. But, but I'm kind of like thinking through that one.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, so do you have anything you want to add on that? Because I do have one other topic I wanted to chat with you about.
No, no. Look, I think the one thing I'll say is it's interesting. Obviously, I was fortunate enough to be at Google. We have resources, a lot of AI talent, et cetera. And there's still, I've only left there a few months ago. There's still ways to go. Like, we did a lot of work, for example, in terms of actually creation of trained our own model, security specific model, et cetera. And that, it wasn't performing as much better than I would have expected. So I think in all this, there's still things for us to learn, to improve upon, but one thing I think the approach that we had is, look, this is anyone in our world, this is going to change how products are built and delivered.
Yeah.
And so working with the technology, understanding what it's good and bad at, learning how to incorporate it within I think those are just natural steps any product development organization should take. Because if you don't, others will do it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Great. All right. Last topic. One thing about you I've always been impressed with. You've always been so healthy. It's like, always like, it's like, I'm not sure what your routine is, but like, what do you do and what do you eat? It's like, you've always like, had this like, really, um, it seems like you have kind of a health and wellness kind of thing kind of going on. So I wanted to kind of chat a little bit about that with you.
Yeah, I'm not crazy. Like, there's one of the members of my team here at Vectra. Like, he's amazing. He does long distance, 50
Oh, yeah.
mile, those types of things. Like, he puts me to shame. Like, I look like a fat oaf next to Olivier. Um, but so how would I say? I like working
You're
out.
so thin for you to look like an oaf. But
I
anyway, good.
Yeah, but I enjoy working out. I was a very mediocre high school athlete, so I was never that athletic or anything. But I did cross country and track, and so you just kind of like get in that rhythm, of just like long, like pain, basically. I used to runner's
Yeah.
high. I never really kind of felt the runner's high, but I kind of actually enjoy feeling like I exercised and worked hard, and so I guess I actually do get it. Um,
Yeah.
and so yeah, and then it's interesting. I got into cycling and mountain biking um, after college, and that's been
Mm.
a great. Yeah, I've just been, and I live in California, so I've gotten older, Nick. I used to go out and like, regardless of the weather, like it would be rain, I
Yeah.
would just be wet and cold, etc. Let's just say, as I've gotten older, I'm not quite as a little more of a fair
Uh,
weather. Like I've got a Peloton. If it's
uh,
really cruddy outside, I'll just stay in the house and do that instead. So
More weather determined, huh?
yeah, exactly. But it's nice to like California. And then lastly, I'd say like I've been trying to get a little bit more into like strength, because I've always done like the endurance stuff and realized that
Mm.
I'm probably need to have a little bit of muscle mass. I don't have a lot, but
Yeah.
hold on to what little I have for as long as possible.
Yeah. Well, yeah, muscle mass is, yeah, that's important. Are you tracking any biomarkers?
I don't actually. Like, I used to, I mean, I track, well, I do. I track my blood pressure, heart rate,
Mm.
but those are really the only ones I track, you
Yeah.
know, regularly. And I have to get blood tests for other stuff anyways. So they make sure I'm not like keeling over every 6 months.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. Yeah. Well, every 6 months, that's good. I've kind of gone to like a 3 month, kind of once a quarter kind of blood test stuff. And I did start to get into like particular biomarker,
Okay. Yeah.
tracking. It's like I've focused, on mostly lipids, now,
Yeah.
and various different kind of lipid, profiles, and then also just the whole kind of vitamin profile as well, to kind of guide supplements, and what kind of
Yeah.
supplements you may want to take. So it's not like
My
just kind of
wife
like
is better at that
dying.
than I am. So yeah, you
Oh
and she
yeah.
would be able to geek out on that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I think what's happened is like as you get older, you start to get more tuned, into that,
And what makes you feel better and not? And yeah, exactly.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was listening to Peter Attia today. So
Hmm. Hmm.
Dr. Peter Attia, kind of like the kind of longevity,
Yeah.
doc, and it was a really great podcast. It was this week's podcast on an application called Metamorphosis, or Morpheus, not Metamorphosis,
Okay.
Morpheus. And so Morpheus is kind of it's kind of the measurement of um, resting heart rate and recovery heart rate, in some pretty good detail. And it kind of it tracks like all of your kind of your IO, so like how much
Mhm.
you're consuming, in terms of
Yeah.
caloric, how much you're kind of spending, and then it gives you, after a week, it'll start to give you recommendations. Okay, I'm going to be doing a weight training session. Okay, it may not tell you kind of what weights to lift, but it might give you kind of like duration. It might be good to
Okay.
do
Yeah.
kind of an hour, half hour, or if you're going to do like some cardio, maybe doing a zone 2 cardio. Like, okay, where you might want to get your target heart rate, today, because it might be different today than it might be tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so I haven't. I thought
Okay.
the
I'll
podcast
look
was
into
really
that.
great. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I'm looking into it too. I'm probably going to buy the app, and the only thing is you got a strap. I'm not a big fan of kind of wearing a strap.
The HRM.
And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so it's like so anyway, I'll check it out if
All right.
once I
Let me know how
dive
it goes.
into it. I'll
Yeah.
let you know how it is. All right, excellent. Hey, Jeff, this has been fun. Yeah, it always is great to chat with you. I think it's probably a good place we can end there, unless you want to kind of dive more into like any of the health stuff. You're good.
I'm good. It's always a
Okay.
pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Nick. Really appreciate it.
Okay.